What is this? Oh, hey, it's a comic book. I just found this in my room. I was thinking maybe I'll try reading this later. What do you think?
Yeah, why not?
You like comic books?
They're okay. I never really sat down to read one. I don't do that too often.
Dude, wait a minute. What if I read it and I'll tell you about it?
That'd be great. Yeah. Then I don't have to do the reading, but we still get to talk.
And here's what we do. We throw the mics on, we record it, and then that could be a podcast.
Do you really think, though, that people would want to listen to that?
Nah, forget it.
Yeah, it's a dumb idea. But maybe.
You know what? We're doing it. In fact, we already did it.
It's true.
Adam and I recently sat down and recorded a new podcast that we're really proud of and we're really excited to share with all of you. There's a link in the show notes, or you could go into the Apple Podcasts app and search for the podcast Gil Reads Comics. And if you're worried that you don't read comics, don't worry. I will guide you as long as you're into Spider-Man, Batman, or other heroes, villains. You'll enjoy this podcast. Maybe you just like the movies. That's all right. You're still welcome. And I hope you read comics after listening, but you don't have to. And I hope you'll give it a listen.
Maybe you're not into that stuff at all, but you just like to listen to Gil and I talk. I imagine that's the only reason you listen to Saulcast.
Yeah, you probably listen and you think, could they stop talking about Better Call Saul? I just want to hear them chat, you know? I want to hear about their day.
Gil's girl problems. You bring those up once in a while.
My girl problems? Wait, who told you about that?
Wait, if you want to learn more about Gil's girl problems, listen to Gil Reads Comics.
Because we use the comics as a springboard to talk about life, philosophy,
love,
me, Adam. We even, I'll tell you this, on the second episode, which is soon to be released, we talk about Better Call Saul.
That's true.
So if you're a completist and you need every bit of Saulcast content, you're going to want to listen to Gil Reads Comics Episode 2.
Definitely. And you can actually find that in nearly any podcast app by searching Gil Reads Comics. That's Gil Reads Comics. And stay tuned for a special sneak peek at the end of this episode of Saulcast for a little taste of what you can expect from Gil Reads Comics.
You're putting a sneak peek at the end?
You better believe it.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to listen to the end of this episode for sure.
Yeah, me too. We all will. Including you, the listener.
Welcome to this episode of Saulcast, where we're talking about Season 4, Episode 9, the penultimate episode of this season of Better Call Saul, titled Wiedersehen. This is our full recap and analysis. We did an instant take earlier in the week, which you're going to want to check out to hear our raw, instant reactions after watching the episode. I'm Gil.
I'm Adam.
Let's get into it. We revisit Nacho this episode, and he has essentially become Lalo's lapdog. Kind of follows him around quietly, and we see them visiting Hector in an old folks' home. Lalo tries to cheer up Hector, tells him that his balls are big, and then... Who's got the biggest balls in the north, south, east, or west? And then he gives the one tap, which we know means yes. Lalo goes into a story about Hector torturing and slowly killing this guy that wronged him in some way. It sounds like he burned all of his stuff. He was a professor, smart guy that kind of rubbed him the wrong way. Then Lalo reveals that he's a sentimental guy. So he walked back into that smoky, burned out building and grabbed something, which he is here to give Hector today. And he hands him a little box, a little wrapped kind of present. When you saw that box, did you immediately know what was in there?
Not right away, but after a couple seconds, it started to click.
And then it started to ding.
Yeah, there you go.
He takes out the bell that we've all seen, and this apparently was that professor's bell that he used to call his bellboy. And then Lalo does his impression, ding, ding, ding. After that, Lalo or Hector has some fun with it, dings it a bunch of times. You can see he sort of annoys everybody in the old folks' home. And then Hector gives Nacho a look, sort of a suspicious look. Then he gives Lalo a look. And Lalo asks Nacho, why don't you go get some Jell-O? So Nacho leaves them alone to chat in private. Eventually, Lalo returns and says your favorite line, same old Hector, just wants to kill everybody. In this scene, we establish a couple things. You and I were wondering who this Lalo character is. It sounds like he is another nephew of Hector's. And we were wondering if he is a friend or foe of Hector. And it seems like he's a confidant, on the surface at least. Now, the suspicious look that Hector gives Nacho, do you think that he is suspicious of him? Or was this just hey, I got to catch up with Lalo, just let us talk in private for a bit?
It's hard for me to gauge Hector's intelligence, not because of the stroke. It was hard for me to gauge it even before then. If he's intelligent, he'll realize that Nacho had some incentive to go after him, because one of the last things that happened before, well, I don't know the timeline, but maybe it was only a matter of weeks between when he basically unwillingly involved Nacho's family and when he had the stroke. And I imagine that Hector's probably a pretty paranoid guy, so it's possible that he is suspicious of Nacho. And it didn't occur to me at the point when Lalo said, go get some Jell-O. To me, it was so funny that I didn't focus on like why he said that. But as you bring it up here, it would make perfect sense that it's because they need to talk away from Nacho, because it seems like Hector might be onto him.
I think that if Hector was suspicious enough of Nacho and he believed that Nacho attempted to kill him, then he would have taken care of him by now. Because we know that the cousins have been around, the twins, so he could have sent them after Nacho if he really wanted to. I do detect a hint of mild suspicion at the very least. I do think that's there, but I don't think it's risen to the level of, hey, Lalo, just a warning, Nacho tried to kill me.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's easy to forget, but Nacho took 2 bullets in service of making it seem like he is with the Salamancas. And I don't think they would easily forget about that.
Well, later on, we see Gus in his office at Pollos Hermanos, and one of the kids who works for him comes in sort of nervous, and he's like, I think one of the bad guys from last year is here. So Gus tells him he'll take care of it. He goes out there and he sees Lalo and Nacho, and he asks if everything's all right. And we get some more great Lalo. He says, are you kidding me? This is the best chicken I've ever had. Is it possible for me to meet the owner? And Gus says, I am the owner. And then Lalo gives this great startled look like, really? Well, my lucky day. So the two of them go to Gus's office. Lalo thanks Gus for saving Hector's life. He makes reference to bad blood between the Salamancas and Gus reassures him that he doesn't see any bad blood. He also Lalo makes reference to Don Eladio probably not wanting Gus and the Salamancas to get too friendly. It's not entirely clear what Lalo wants here, but he ends off by just telling Gus, I wanted to let you know I'm in town. Let me know if you need any favors. On their way out, Lalo asks Nacho to take him to the chicken farm where they do their drug deals with Gus. And that's the last we see of them in this episode. My question here is, what is Lalo's play? What is he trying to accomplish, or is he just winging it? Winging it, by the way, it's a chicken pun.
This is just every time we talk about Gus's plotline, it just makes me hungry.
We've got to save it for last from now on.
Yeah, good point. So Lalo's system seems to be that he is overly friendly with everyone in a very transparent way. And so it could just work out well for him because it gets in people's heads and allows him to make moves later strategically. So even if he doesn't have a specific plan for Gus right now, it still could be beneficial for him to just to screw with his head.
And on the surface, like you said, he's saying things that a friend or an ally would say. But at the same time, it's so transparently over the top that you think Gus would be able to see right through it. But the feeling I get is that Lalo knows that and he doesn't mind. I think he's trying to play a game here of keep your enemies close. And he's also trying to be somebody that's unpredictable. I think he likes the fact that when he walks into a room, people get uncomfortable. Like, okay, what is this guy going to do next? Because he really seems, I mean, we keep saying it, over the top. He's so much fun to watch on a TV show, but if you met somebody like that in real life, you'd be like, okay, I'm getting out of this room.
Yeah, right. And what we're doing right here of saying we don't know what his game is, that's the same feeling he's probably trying to induce in all the people we see him interact with on the show.
Yeah, and it is, we talked about it a little bit in the instant take, but watching super reserved and serious Gus interact with Lalo is a ton of fun. And I'm hoping that next episode, maybe Gus is suspicious of Lalo. He asks Mike to check him out. If we can get the two of them interacting, that could be some gold.
Right. Do you think, we touched on this in the instant take, what do you make of him referring to Gus basically saving Hector's life by bringing in that excellent doctor?
You and I talked about that, wondering, do people buy it? Do they think that Gus did that out of the kindness of his heart and it was truly a favor to the Salamancas? Or do they see through it and they know that Gus only saved Hector's life because he wants to keep him alive and torture him? I don't think anybody suspects the second option there, but I do think that there are plenty of reasons that they can imagine why Gus would save Hector's life for reasons other than wanting to save his life. I think the theory you put forward was probably the most valid, which is that Gus wants stability and he feels like he's got a pretty good handle on how to deal with Hector. He doesn't need somebody new coming in and taking over and having to figure out this new dynamic. We know that's not why he did it. That could be part of the equation, but I think other people would probably assume that.
Mm-hmm. And do you think one theory we floated a few weeks back was that Lalo is maybe kind of a rogue Salamanca, kind of self-interested, and saw a power vacuum that he could swoop in on. And the way he's interacting with Hector and the loyalty he expressed by giving him the bell suggests maybe he really is just true blue Salamanca and he's there to just help out the family. But I actually don't think anything he's done so far is incompatible with the idea of him just being in it for power.
I still think he's in it for power because, yes, the first scene, you can read that as, I'm super supportive of Hector. I'm here to make sure everything runs smoothly until he can rise back to power. But the next scene where he's with Gus, I don't know what he's doing there, but that felt like somebody who's making moves. And I doubt that Hector gave him any instruction on, try and form more of an alliance with Gus or do X, Y, and Z with Gus and Don Eladio. So that felt to me like he was going a little rogue. And I can't think of why would he do that unless he was trying to get power himself. And I'll say that we have reason to believe he does get more power because of the scene in Breaking Bad that you've made reference to in other episodes, where when they take Saul, they being Walter and Jesse, when they take Saul out to the desert, he thinks he's been kidnapped by Lalo. And he says it in a way where he's scared of Lalo. So I think that we have good reason to think he will eventually rise in power.
Agreed. And one last point about this is if he stole that bell from the scene of where they burnt down that professor's hotel, he was so descriptive about it and theatric. Like, remember he says, even the soles of my shoes were starting to melt, like the rubber was starting to melt beneath him. And he was so graphic and descriptive about it, it sounded rehearsed. If he stole that bell, why wouldn't Hector have known about it? It's not like he needed to keep it secret. It would have been a funny thing they could laugh over, 5 minutes after this happened. But instead, he didn't tell him about it for what seems like years, and then he gives it to him today. That sounds like something that he concocted. The bell might not even be real. It could be one that he just found a replica, and he's giving it to him, again, just to kind of suck up and demonstrate loyalty.
Yeah, it very well could have been a lie. I took it for granted at first that he was just telling a true story. But when you think about it, that is kind of weird that he would, like, what has he been doing with that bell all this time? Has he been holding on to it for a rainy day if a situation arises where I need to gain Hector's trust more than I have it now, I'm going to keep this in my back pocket. It is kind of odd that A, he would go back into the house, and B, he would keep that bell for all this time. The reason he gives Hector is, hey, call me sentimental. And I don't know if I buy it. But we also know very little about him. It is possible this is the sort of crazy thing he does.
One thing we do know is that Hector loves that bell, and he loves dinging it. And maybe Lalo just didn't want to share. So he thought Hector's the kind of guy who's going to love this bell. I don't want him to know that I have it because I love it and I want to play with it.
He's gonna try and get that bell back at some point, I think.
Okay, shifting gears to Kim and Jimmy's plot lines this episode. We open up with Kim on crutches. And just for the first half second that I saw this, my mind was all over the place. I was like, wait, what? Is this like another flash forward or something? Because I'm used to seeing her with a cast on her arm from that car accident, so it didn't seem like much of a stretch to, at some point, just see her on crutches for some other reason. Just because it's something I was used to seeing her in that sort of position. Then after a couple of seconds, I realized, okay, they're up to something.
Maybe it was a mistake by the writers, where they were like, yep, we're putting the scene together. Oh, shoot, wait a minute. It was her arm that was broken, not her leg. Whatever, just shoot the scene.
Yeah. Well, they just decided to write around that. So we see that she's entering this office, and she's lying about being a single mother with an 8-month-old, and she has an incompetent brother who can't help with anything. Or, he tries. Which, although that was a lie, you knew that she was talking about Jimmy. And so we see that she's here working to help Mesa Verde get that new approval that she previously told them would be impossible. And we said last episode that, or in the instant take, that it's unlike her to just kind of say that something's not possible and move on. But we took that as a sign of this shift in her character. But now she's working hard to try to get this to happen for them. And I think it's because she found more of a crafty, kind of schemy way to do it. And that's the kind of thing she has fun with. So that's what motivated her to go after this, even though maybe she could have done it through legal means, but that she didn't want to. But this is the kind of way that would have appealed to her.
Wouldn't have been as fun that way.
And so, exactly. And so they have this brilliant plot to have Jimmy come in like a dope. Basically, he left the baby in the car, and Kim freaks out. The woman who runs that office,
she stayed behind. Jimmy put a bag of I forget what it was. It milk?
It was milk. Yeah, it was a bag of it was a bag of what was supposed to be breast milk, and he leaves it just barely on sitting on top of the plans, these legal documents, and it starts leaking little by little. which was genius. It was absolutely genius.
And Jimmy plays that role so well. He's like, "Wow, what did I do wrong? I just left him in there for a few minutes." And the lady's like, "What are you doing? Go help her."
And everything works. So the plans get destroyed by the milk. Thankfully, the lady, they already proved to the lady that Kim has an exact replica already on her. And so the lady thinks that that's the one Kim puts back out, but in fact, she ends up putting out the new plans that were the ones that Mesa Verde wanted to get in place of the old ones. And I couldn't help but feel bad for the woman who was approving the plans, because she looked so proud of herself and happy to be helping out Kim, because she felt bad for Kim, and she's like, "Let's make this official," and she stamps it. And she looks so self-satisfied, and really she's just, playing right into their trap.
And this is a step further for Kim than some of the antics with Huel, because I think with the Huel gambit, it was really just Jimmy and Kim that were putting themselves in danger. But now they've involved this woman who, and you could argue that Jimmy involved that busload of people, but I think there the risk was so low. But here, if somebody figured out that they swapped out the plans and that woman was complicit in it, she would probably get in trouble.
Yeah, that woman would likely get in trouble, so she's putting someone else at risk. And now she's breaking the law for what is much harder to justify. With the Huel situation, ultimately, it was pretty obvious that Huel did not commit the crime that he was being accused of committing, at least not in the way that should get him punished. Whereas here, it's like, in some part, you can sympathize with her for wanting to cut through red tape, but this is not nearly as noble.
Sorry. I just pictured Huel hitting the cop with a bag of sandwiches again, and it's literally just it's just cracking me up.
I wish we got to see Huel react to the good news.
Oh yeah, they always leave Huel hanging, just like in Breaking Bad. The last time we saw him was locked up in that safe house, so there's that hanging thread of where is Huel in all this.
Yeah, he was just sitting there with the fan spinning. Yeah, and there's so much about this that's risky. Like, it's in an official government office. There could be security cameras. I know that Kim and Jimmy are smart and probably thought about a lot of this, but it seems like something that could so easily come back to bite her.
If that woman didn't agree to swap out the documents, that would have been a disaster.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know what would have happened there. And then how do you explain it? Like, if it didn't work and then Mesa Verde gets informed that the documents were ruined, oh, and by the way, it was your lawyer and her incompetent brother that did it, who spilled breast milk on it. It's like, wait a minute. First of all, Kim doesn't have a kid, and that's not her brother.
Kim, we've met Jimmy before. We know that's not your brother.
Yeah. So that was insanely risky, but it was really cool to see them pull it off, and I was very impressed.
It was amusing to watch, but I think we already talked about the fact that they involved an innocent bystander, but two, just the fact that she did this purely for the sake of doing it. I mean, she didn't even try to take a legitimate route, so a lot of implications for Kim's character here.
Right. Next, we have the title sequence. And I know I like to bring these up, even though we never really know what they mean. The same is true this time. So what we see is basically the bottom of a urinal with some burnt out matches sitting in the water right next to the urinal cake. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on this.
Didn't it say Better Call Saul on the matchbox?
I believe so.
Okay. I think that it represents Jimmy when he becomes Saul. He's going in the gutter. He will do the dirty work. And urinals are dirty, but it's next to the urinal cake, which keeps it. Does it actually cleanse it, or is that purely for scent?
I think it's for scent, and the reason I actually brought up this title sequence is specifically because of the urinal cake. I was hoping we could talk about that.
So I think that the urinal cake represents the fact that although Saul Goodman, he does the dirty work, he has a way of putting this veneer on where he can convince people that he's cleaner, bigger than he is, and he puts on a show, much like a urinal cake can put out a smell, like a good smell that it's not real.
So Jimmy is a human urinal cake. I'll take that. And the reason I bring it up is unrelated to the show. Did it ever occur to you that most women have no idea what a urinal cake is?
I think I've heard that before, but every time I hear that fact, it blows my mind a little bit. Like, yeah, it's true.
Right, because it never really it's not something that's discussed out in the open. We might be the first podcast to ever discuss urinal cakes.
This might be our most listened to episode yet. We're going to get some awards for this.
Yeah, we're
breaking new ground.
Yeah, I think so. This is revolutionary. So I implore everyone here, every male listening, to ask a female that you trust, just if they know what a urinal cake is, because I've tried this multiple times, and no woman I've asked actually knows what it is. I had to explain it to them.
Don't ask a random woman on the street. All right, this has got to be somebody you know, a wife perhaps, or friend, and report back in with your findings.
Yeah, and for any women listening, the urinal cake is that little pink puck that you saw at the bottom of the urinal in the starting of this episode during the title sequence with the music. And like we said, all it is it's basically like a soap or something like that, which gradually dissolves over time, and it makes the whole area smell better. The more you know. Kim and Jimmy go to a diner to celebrate the success of their scam. We find out that it's only 1 week until Jimmy gets his law license back.
Or does he?
Bum, bum, bum. And he makes a nice offhand remark where he says, well, of course they all know me as Saul Goodman in terms of the people he'd been selling the phones to. He thinks of that as a client development. But they don't know his real legal name. And we see that he's just going to end up adopting that. Then he talks about how, our powers combined, they're very strong together. And that's something I'd been thinking about and remarked on last week. I was so excited when Kim said, let's do it again at the end of the previous episode, because we've seen so much evidence now over the series about how much they can get accomplished when they work together. The problem is they don't really aim high or in a very noble direction. And so Kim is thinking that same thing, and she says, I think we should only use our powers for good. And Jimmy's skeptical about this, and he reminds her, we just drove 300 miles to just get to a bigger bank branch for Mesa Verde. And he kind of backs off of that, and Kim basically says, I can't tell you exactly what good is, but we'll know it when we see it. And I think she's sort of copping out here.
I love that Jimmy called her out, and I would call that a total cop-out, because she had already told Mesa Verde that they can't do this, and there wasn't much blowback. So this doesn't even really help her personally that much. You can't point to anything in this situation where you can say this is good for somebody that deserves it and they just didn't have a better way of getting it.
Yeah, it was just for fun.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it was sort of victimless.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, actually. It was victimless. There was risk we talked about, but assuming everything goes as planned, and as far as we know it did, nobody gets hurt from this. But actually saying that out loud now makes me wonder, is it possible next episode we will see some consequences to this?
We could. They've gotten away with everything so far, but you know that it can't go on forever. We see Jimmy in a very sharp suit, better than his usual suits. And he kind of has this, he's playing with his facial expressions. He's trying to look serious. Then we see that he's entering this basically questioning with the board, like the bar association, to see if he can get his license back. They ask him about what he's been doing for the past year, and he says he worked at CC Mobile, just to put bread on the table, which is funny because he was doing a lot more than that. Then he recites something he read in a legal journal about Justice Scalia, and on the one hand, I'm impressed watching him do it, because you see, okay, he's definitely, he can get things done. He can memorize all of that jargon. But at the same time, I don't know if they're buying it.
I think they're buying it because I think it's easy when you're watching from the outside like we are to tell when someone's BSing. But I think working in business enough, you realize that when you're actually in those conversations, it's a lot harder to tell if someone's being genuine or not. And I think just as humans, we tend to start off from a position of giving benefit of the doubt. We believe that what we're being told is something genuine unless there's a big red flag where you start to doubt it. So I think that they were buying everything he said until towards the end.
I agree with that. I think the point where it really turned, and it was pretty obvious, was when one of the people on the board asks, "What does the law mean to you?" And that is a sort of out there question, but it shouldn't have been that hard to answer. But instead he says, "The law, yeah, okay." And almost like, that's a stupid question.
I read it as, okay, all right, we're going to do this one then, all right. Like he was getting ready to come up with more BS.
Yeah, either reading of it does not look good for him. And he discusses his past and growing up, how the law was the last thing on his mind. Then he got a job with attorneys, and something inside him made him want to try it. And he talks about the University of American Samoa, which I'd always wanted to know a little bit more about what happened there, because we see he's got that sweatshirt that he wears, and he has the degree hanging on in his office. And it seems like something that he turns into a point of pride. If he hasn't already, as he becomes Saul Goodman that we know and love, he kind of hangs it as a badge of honor that he was able to do this through correspondence school, and he didn't need to go the prestigious route, and he can still be successful, which I think is right in line with the personality he goes on to develop. And he talks about how it wasn't natural for him to go to law school, and that it practically killed him. And every time he tried to quit, he just kept coming back to it. But the thing he loved most was actually working with clients. Now that part seemed very genuine, because it seems like he loves working with people or working on them.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
He talks about the importance of the American legal system, and then he talks about how much he missed working in this system for the past year. And he looks like he's holding back tears. This is when things start to get more shaky.
Did he ever actually answer the question, what does the law mean to you? Or did he just talk about how he felt like he wanted to be a lawyer and how he went to the university and all that? But did he ever actually directly answer their question by the end of his monologue?
I would say no. I think he brushes up against it when he says that our legal system is the closest thing to legal justice that we have. But that doesn't say too much about what the law really means to him. What he talked about more was what a career in law means to him. But which I think answers the question. I think in some ways the law doesn't mean that much to him in any kind of grand philosophic sense. The law is there sometimes as a tool and sometimes as a hurdle.
Yeah, I think that he does a good job of not outright lying or being disingenuous about most things. He picks out the thing. In this case, he picked out the thing that really did have meaning for him, and he chose to speak about that. And like you said, it sort of brushes up against the question, and you could argue that he did answer the question. I do think they would have been satisfied with everything, even with this answer, until when you go into the next question.
Right. Yeah, and so when they ask if there's any particular influence on your views, it was a very leading question, and they want him to mention Chuck. They're just waiting for him to say something about it. And then he goes, well, credit where credit is due. UAS. Go land crabs.
Do you think that he knew in the moment they wanted him to talk about Chuck, or did he realize that after he walked out of the room?
I think that there is some kind of subconscious knowledge about it, some subconscious feeling of a zone of discussion that just was not on the table for him, that he was just not going to go there. Because you see the way later that when Kim confronts him about this and it comes up about, what did you do when they asked you about Chuck? And he almost is playing, it seems like he's playing dumb with her. It seems like one part of him is legitimately surprised to hear his name mentioned, and the other part is aware that they wanted him to talk about it, but that it was something he was just going to refuse to do.
It might be the first time we've seen him unwilling to... It would seem within his character to talk about Chuck as an inspiration just to satisfy them, but it felt like he is unwilling to go there. That's a bridge too far for him in terms of being someone he's not.
Right, and it's interesting because he does not draw lines very often. One of the few lines he draws is one that's ultimately not that important. Like, he could have just said what they wanted him to say. Probably everything would have gone well, and he'd have what he wanted.
Yeah, a few words about Chuck would have done it.
So what do you think it is? Do you think it's pride, or is it that he just has such hard feelings toward Chuck that he wouldn't want... He just doesn't want that to enter the discussion?
My gut reaction is that he does have a lot of anger towards Chuck and the fact that he tried to keep him down his whole life, and it would just not feel right to him. It wouldn't feel right to Jimmy to have to credit Chuck with anything, because for him, he was an adversary his whole life. So, yeah, I think he just can't do it. And I didn't get the feeling that when they asked him the question, he was aware they were talking about Chuck. That it might have been the thing that hit him when he walked out of the room and he sort of stopped. I think that's when he realized, like, damn it, they were asking about Chuck. And I think that is an unusual oversight for him. To your point earlier, that might have just been his subconscious, just blanking out that part of the conversation, not letting him see it, because that's how badly he just does not want to talk about it, at least not in that context.
I agree with that. I think that's a really good idea about... Okay, so after this conversation ends and he's standing outside the office, like you mentioned, he almost turns back around to re-enter the office, but he stops himself. And I agree. I think it has something to do with that. Maybe he wasn't going to definitely go back in and say something about Chuck, but I think he at least felt like, okay, I missed the mark on that. There was definitely, I was not answering the question the right way. And I think it's very possible he actually did think about saying something about Chuck. But again, he stopped himself, which was probably the right move at that point. So he finds out that they are going to deny him. And so he approaches the guy who was sitting on that board in the hallway of this building, and they're like going down the stairwell. And the guy says, look, these decisions are never easy. And Jimmy's begging him to just tell him what he did wrong. He's like, I did everything right. And it was really tough to watch because we've never seen Jimmy get this angry over anything. He is told that some of the members found you somewhat insincere and you're free to apply again next year. He gets so pissed off, he throws his bag at the wall as hard as he possibly can, just a few feet in front of a guy who's descending the stairs.
And the guy waits and then just starts walking again.
Yeah. Why does he want to be a lawyer so bad?
We know that he loves what he was doing in that room, trying to convince those people to give him that job. He loves doing that on a surface level. I think he enjoys figuring out what do people want to hear, and then can I perform to that and exceed their expectations and get what I want. Then you add into the mix that he's helping somebody to get using that skill. I think he just loves doing that. I think that's his passion. And I don't know another career that would give him that as much as being a lawyer would. And you add on top of that the chip on his shoulder of living in his older brother's shadow his whole life, who was a lawyer. Add on top of that, he's in love with Kim. She's a lawyer, and he feels like they all look down on him. So I think it's just the perfect storm of stuff that would tell him in his brain, I need to be a lawyer. And the more people try and stop me, the more I need it.
And in terms of the expectations that other people have for him, and again, all this external pressure telling him, like, you need to be a lawyer, we then see such a heartbreaking transition where we see Kim, who's on the phone on a conference call, but she's not really paying much attention, and she has some nail polish, and she is painting on this mug that says, world's second best lawyer?
Yeah.
Is that what it said? And she was writing again on it to celebrate his approval. And that's very, very sweet of her. And it's like, it's so nice to see that she is excited for him. And she got a monogrammed bag that said JMM on it for Jimmy. All this stuff is so nice of her. And at the same time, 2 seconds earlier, Jimmy just got this terrible news.
Yeah, it was a heartbreaking scene. Especially since we've seen Jimmy and Kim be so distant for a while now, and then to see this act of appreciation, or that's probably, to see this act of kindness from Kim that harkens back to much earlier in the series when we originally saw her give him that mug, kind of makes you feel nostalgic, but then you throw on top of that, you know it's all going to fall apart shortly.
And that does seem like what's going to happen. So Jim calls and delivers the news, and then we see him. He's going to meet her at the parking garage of her office, and we see him speeding around like crazy through this parking garage. And it's so reckless. It's like just because he's pissed off, he's like, if anyone's walking in there, they'll definitely get killed. And he's just cruising up the parking garage. Kim is on the roof smoking. And so they're both turning to these reckless, kind of self-destructive tendencies. I think that's one of the things they have in common, is that's one of the things they do to cope or to feel better.
That was I was with Jimmy up until that point when he was swerving around the parking garage. I hate people who do that. I used to work in a building with a similar parking garage where the turns were really narrow. Literally half my colleagues got into car accidents in there because they whip around the turns like crazy.
That's nuts. Yeah, just a couple years ago, someone hit me head on in a parking garage because they were texting. It's like, that's actually, that is a more dangerous place to speed and to text than a normal road because you have no room there. Like, I saw him coming like 15 seconds away, and I was blaring my horn, and I couldn't turn. There's nothing I could do.
He got out of the car. He's like, sorry, bro. It's just like I thought I was going to be a lawyer again, and my girlfriend Kim, but then they asked me about my brother, and it just like, I'm sorry, man. I was just really pissed off.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So he jumps out of his car and he's saying, insincere. How could they say that? And he looks ridiculously frazzled. Like, this expression on his face is something we've never seen before. That was like great acting by Bob Odenkirk. And so he's basically recounting everything that happened, and he makes a really good point, which is once the board hears the word insincere, I'm screwed. How do you disprove insincere? And what he's alluding to, and this is something that they make his character very aware of persuasion and of how people get influenced, and he's basically talking about confirmation bias. It's like once you're told that Jimmy's insincere, even if you don't necessarily believe it right away, your brain will just start looking for evidence of that fact, and it's going to find it. You know, if the board instead said that he's a very honest person and very genuine, they could then find evidence for that instead.
If somebody before the scene where Jimmy is talking to the board, if someone had told you, hey, just a warning, this guy is super insincere, suddenly you would read into everything. Every time he pauses, you think, oh, he's manipulating me now. He's trying to think of the right thing to say. Or when they asked him the question about what does the law mean to you, when he said, okay, right, there's a couple ways to read it. If you're told he's insincere in advance, you read it in a negative light and assume, okay, so he's looking at the next pitch and he's thinking about what's the best way for me to hit this question out of the park.
Exactly. He's very aware of what's going on in the heads of other people. When it comes up that he was asked a question about the meaning of the law, he says, you know, he gave a great answer and that everything went well, which was kind of funny because it's not exactly true. But I don't think he realizes. I think he did think it was a great answer. But it does make you wonder, what about that moment where he almost turned around and went back in the office? So I think internally he has some tension about that. She asks him, what did they say when you talked about Chuck? And he seems so oblivious. He's just like, what does Chuck have to do with this? And I think he was serious when he asked that.
Which would imply that maybe he hadn't connected the dots earlier when he walked out of the room. That he maybe just felt like I didn't answer the question right, but didn't explicitly realize they wanted him to talk about Chuck.
Yeah, they've done for a character that is the main person we see on this show. He's the main character. They've done a great job making his psyche kind of impenetrable. Like, we've been watching him. We see where he ends up. We saw multiple seasons of that in Breaking Bad. We see him now, and I still can't quite put my finger on what his deal is.
I've listened to the writers talk a little bit about the process of writing for Jimmy, and there will be times where even they can't quite explain why he does what he does. Because sometimes somebody will throw out an idea, what if Jimmy does X, Y, or Z? And if it feels right, like they could see him doing that, or that feels like it's the right direction, they'll go there and they'll have their own theories about why is he doing this. But I think that's actually a really clever way of writing him because it makes it more real. In real life, you can't point to, oh, this is what's motivating that person, A, B, C. It's a lot more complicated than that. And I think they've done a really great job of painting the character that way.
And so his response when Chuck comes up and Kim is like, wait, you didn't talk about him? And his response is like, what's there to say? He was my brother. He was alive. Now he's dead. And that's basically the size of it for him. And then his response from there is basically to start lashing out against Kim, which, it's very interesting timing. I think at the time that you watch it, this doesn't seem like a direct response to Chuck coming up, but I think it definitely caused him to turn against her. And he basically says, you don't believe me either, and you think I'm some asshole, this lowlife, that only guilty people would hire. When you see me, all you see is Slippin' Jimmy. And why should we make a big deal about my brother, about Chuck at my reinstatement hearing? Life goes on. I don't think about him. I don't miss him. So sue me. Which was a nice little pun at the end. And he points out again that he gets this look from Kim where he thinks he can read her mind, that she is seeing him as some lesser person. And he says, there it is again. That's why we don't have the office, which is a very petty thing for him to bring up right now. And it's like, this is not what's upsetting him. What's upsetting him is that he got turned down for approval, and yet he's lashing out at Kim. What do you make of that reaction?
I think that he took her bringing up Chuck as sort of an accusation of, why are you not having feelings about Chuck? And he also is, so I think he kind of started with anger, just visceral anger at her for bringing it up. And then because he was feeling angry, that then brought up things that were already in his mind that he wasn't happy about in terms of Kim, right? That's why he brought up The Office. That's why he brought up the fact that she just wants to be with him when it's convenient. And he's not entirely wrong. Right? They're connecting recently only because all of a sudden she wants to be part of Slippin' Jimmy's nefarious plots. That's what connected the two of them back together. But then when Jimmy wants to do more of this and he has other ideas, she doesn't want to go for it. It's only when she deems that it's good. So,
right. He says, you call me for fun, when you want to roll around in the dirt with me.
Yeah, which is a very visual, great metaphor, and it's, like I said, I think it's accurate. So I read the scene as he had a visceral, angry reaction because of one trigger, but then that brought up all the other things he was angry at her for that were sort of bubbling under the surface.
Yeah, I think so. It was kind of a spark that set off a lot of feelings that were there already. And she also they're both making some good points here, and she makes a good point, which is, I'm on your side. I drop everything for you. I clean up your messes. I've helped you commit felonies. And she's right. She's done a ton of stuff for him. But the way that she's looking at him, and he can't handle it. And when he says, you only call me for fun or when you want to roll around in the dirt with me, she says, I'm always there when you call and you need help with something. Maybe next time I won't answer. And he goes, yeah, there you go. Kick a man when he's down. And before we get to Kim's response, which was great, that's a great line for Jimmy because it just totally encapsulates his attitude. It's like, from day one of this series, we keep seeing him come close to success and then self-sabotaging. And he is addicted to being in that subordinate role or that position of weakness that he's trying to claw his way out of. That's what he does best. It's when he's desperate. When he's desperate, he feels justified in turning to illegitimate means of getting things done. And so that he's in his element there. But he has conflicting feelings over it because he also sees that as his low points and when he's down. And so you even see in the promotional posters, he's walking uphill like at an incredibly, inhumanly steep angle. He's just digging himself out of holes all the time. And he's addicted to it, and I think in part because of the way he grew up in Chuck's shadow.
It reminds me of Jerry Seinfeld explaining the character of George Costanza, because that character always does Slippin' Jimmy-like things on a smaller scale. He has no qualms about screwing people over, but the way he justifies it is that he is perpetually in a state of feeling like the universe has screwed him over. So he has no problem lashing back out against other people. He feels justified. It's a lot like Jimmy, except I think there's another layer for Jimmy where he also just feels addicted to being in that down state where he's clawing back up.
Yeah, that's actually a really good analogy. It's like they both see the universe is against them somehow, and so I earned the right to do this thing that would otherwise not be okay. And Kim's response is, Jimmy, you're always down. And she's basically right for all the reasons we just mentioned. And so at this point, I started to feel really stupid because it was just a week ago that we were so excited over Jimmy and Kim getting back together. And well, they had been together, but it seemed like they had reunited more vigorously, and I was very excited to see where their relationship could go. Like, we were speculating maybe they even stay together all the way through Breaking Bad. And now it's not looking so good. We see Kim back at home drinking a beer alone. Jimmy walks in just to pack up his things. Was he moving out? Is that what it looked like to you? Or at least gathering his stuff, like to stay at a hotel or something?
Yeah, a hotel, the nail salon. I think he wanted to get out of there. He didn't even talk to her when he walked in.
Yeah. He could join the owner of that copier store who's sleeping on the couch of the office.
Hey, Ira,
you could order a pizza
you
together.
Roommate?
Yeah. Yeah, you would love that.
I would love that, yeah. Maybe that'll be a special feature on the DVD. Like what you didn't see between episodes.
So Jimmy's standing there staring at the mirror, and Kim is right next to him. And he says, "I messed it all up." And this is kind of the thing he does frequently. It's like a cycle for him. Is he causes a bunch of problems. He blames everyone else. He feels justified in doing something wrong to try to fix it. And then he kind of puts on a grand show of remorse. And it seems like Kim is going to go along with it. And she says, "Well, you still want to be a lawyer?" He says, "Yeah." She says, "Okay, well, we can start with that."
And she sounds, at least to my ears, somewhat surprised when he says he still wants to be a lawyer.
Yeah, she seemed to expect that he would be discouraged enough to not even want to anymore. But I think part of her feels, okay, well, if he still wants to be a lawyer, then there's hope for us. I don't know why it all hinges on that, but I think she sees that as a sign that he still wants to achieve something of significance.
Yeah, do you think that she was thinking if he decides not to be a lawyer, he's going to go full-on criminal?
I don't know. I don't know if she's fully realized. Like we have the benefit of knowing his like ultimate destination. I don't think she realizes how much he really gets out of this kind of criminal type stuff. She might think he's gonna just be Slippin' Jimmy for the rest of his life, which is criminal, but maybe not in the hardened sense that we might think about. What do you think's gonna happen?
We said it on the Instant Take, and I haven't really changed my feelings on it. I think that Kim is going to help Jimmy in some way, because when she asked him if he still wants to be a lawyer, and he says yes, and she says, we can start with that. The way she said that is, we can start with that, and I read that as, we can work with that. There's something we can do. I have a feeling she's hatching a scheme to get him practicing law sooner than a year from now. Whether it's a legitimate path or maybe it's something that's more in the gray area, I have a feeling it'll be there. And more Slippin' Jimmy type antics, but I really don't know. I don't know enough about the law to know what paths they have here, what that could look like. But that's my feeling.
Same here. I know that they have the option to appeal, and what I worry about is that she will help him get his law career back at the expense of her own somehow. That might be too obvious or like too obvious of an ironic consequence, but it seems like the kind of thing that could happen.
Yeah, we keep thinking, or I think the obvious thought is that Kim dies tragically somehow, and that's why she's not in Breaking Bad. But if she loses the ability to practice law, that would be tragic in its own right, and in a little bit more of an interesting and, like you said, ironic way. It feels obvious, but only because you said it just now. I hadn't thought it at all previously, so I could see that happening.
I've heard some gag theories that Kim becomes Wendy from Breaking Bad.
Wait, who's Wendy? I thought that was a fish.
No. Wendy is a meth-addicted prostitute that Jesse hangs out with sometimes.
Okay, I guess that's possible. That would be, I could see a montage where her appearance slowly changes, and then at the end of the episode, she's like, "Hey, Jesse."
Okay, well, you're on record as formally endorsing that theory. I'm going to go ahead and say I don't think that's what's going to happen, but let everyone know that that's what Gil thinks. That's his prediction.
You're going to cut together different words I said during the podcast. But yes, I definitely think that Jesse is falling in love with Kim, who is a meth-addicted prostitute. Wait.
Well, you just said it, so I don't even need to do any cutting.
Wait, did I make up the prostitute part? Or you said that, right?
No, okay, that's real. That's real. You didn't just insert that.
We check back in with Mike, Werner, and the gang. They're underground, about to blast, and we learn a little bit about the logistics of blasting. How do they cover up the noise? They've got a guy in a truck above ground.
Tyrus.
What's that?
That was Tyrus.
I couldn't remember his name, but we've got Tyrus in a truck above ground, and he's going to start driving and make noise once they blast. But the blasting isn't working and something is wrong. Werner has to go and check the wire. So he goes by himself to where the bombs are wired up, and he starts to breathe very quickly. And he tells himself to, get yourself together. Were these symptoms of a panic attack? Was he on the verge of something like that?
Yeah, he was on the verge of a panic attack.
And we were trying to figure out, why is this? I mean, when you're watching that scene initially, my mind went to a few possibilities. Did he see something? Is he worried about the bomb? We start to realize that he's just feeling claustrophobic. He doesn't want to be there anymore. He misses his wife. But he fixes the wire. He goes back. They blast, and they celebrate. But you can tell that Werner is a bit more subdued, even more than usual maybe, and Mike notices. We cut to the living quarters, where they're all continuing to celebrate. They're having beer. And I'm going to go on record here and say, I like Kai. I'm a Kai fan.
Yeah, he definitely endeared himself to the audience. It was just fun to see him kind of get Mike to have a beer.
Yeah, they were all having beer, and they offer one to Mike, and he's like, no, I'm good. And you hear, I think it's Kai who says it, no, we don't accept this. You can't always be on duty, Mike. And then he's got this big smile, and he's cheering for Mike. And then Mike grabs a beer, he gives a big smile, and he says, Gut Arbeit. Good job in German. And so it's great.
Yeah, and they really do have something to be proud of. We don't know exactly how blasting works, but this is something they desperately wanted to avoid at all costs if they could. And they ended up having to do it, which means it was a big deal. It was not easy. It was dangerous, not just physically, but it could have been loud enough to get them caught. And it's probably something that normally requires a lot of people and a lot of planning. And so the fact that they were able to pull it off is pretty amazing.
Definitely have a lot to be proud of here. While they're celebrating, Werner is once again by himself, pretty subdued. Mike goes to check up with him. And at first, Werner is, no, it's good, whatever. And Mike won't let it go. He says, Werner, I have to know what's going on with you. And that's where we learn that Werner, this is the longest that he's been away from his wife, and he wants to go visit her. He has Hector-sized balls here to ask Mike.
Can that be the new standard?
On a scale of Pebble to Hector. He has the gumption to ask Mike if he can leave for 5 days tops to visit his wife. He says he can put Kai in charge while he's gone. And Mike says, you miss your wife? Finish the job. Then you'll have so much money you never have to leave her again. And Werner says, okay, yeah, you're right. It was a flight of fancy. Clearly he's not swayed. Mike tries to throw out there, look, you can talk to her on the phone tomorrow. We'll let you talk to her extra long. And he's like, yeah, good. But you can tell something's up, right?
Yeah. You know that he's he just knows he's not going to get what he needs out of Mike, and so he's not going to keep pushing it.
Should Mike have just...
That doesn't mean he was convinced.
I mean, hindsight's 20/20, but should they have just let him go for the weekend?
I don't think he would have come back.
Yeah, I agreed. I don't know that he would have come back, and it's way, way too risky in terms of we already seen him talk.
Yeah, and also, like, we've seen him talk already, and what are they going to do? Like, Mike's going to go with him to Germany and chaperone him? Actually, I would have liked to see that. That would have been cool.
That could be that's another feature on the DVD. Sightseeing.
Extra scenes.
Mike, you have got to try this hot dog. This is pretty good, Werner.
Well, of all the things you could have chosen.
I meant to say sausage.
Let's go on.
We're in the security trailer. Mike walks in and says the lamest joke that I've heard in all of Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad. He says, "How goes it with the dirty half dozen?" Because there are 6 of them, Adam.
That does kind of sound like Mike's sense of humor. It's sort of just in line with that joke he made a few episodes back about the Hummel, where he called it a valuable Wunderkind.
That's right. Definitely, yeah.
He likes wordplay.
He does. I mean, he's a dad joke.
Yeah, exactly.
He's just checking in, and security gives him the update. Werner's been talking to his wife for an hour and a half. Do you want us to wrap it up? Mike, very heartfelt, he says, you know what? Let him keep talking until he's done. And maybe that'll be all he needs to not flee. But they wrap up the phone call, and then we see Werner get up, and the all the audio sort of dies down. You hear all the Kai and the gang all talking, and that fades away, and then some music takes over. Werner starts to look around, and it appears he's kind of just looking at everything sentimentally. He's feeling bad, but then you see him notice the cameras. And that's when I think it becomes clear to all of us that he's plotting something.
Yeah. He's plotting something, and also I think he's tired of feeling like he's under someone else's thumb all the time. We see him smoking a cigarette, which I don't know if we've seen that before. He's not in a good place.
Do you feel bad for him, or are you sort of are you in line with Mike's thinking of, dude, just put your head down and get it done, and then you never have to worry about any of this again?
Yeah, look, I can sympathize because clearly he really wants to leave, and with any job other than like the military or like a prison job, you can leave, you can quit if you want. But with this, I mean, he in some ways he's stuck there like a slave, or that's at least how he feels, which is right in line with the theme of Gus kind of having people work for him involuntarily. And so, yeah, Werner can't go, and so I do feel bad for him. But I more strongly sympathize with Mike in the sense that it's like, look, you can do this. It's not torture. Like, so what? Okay, I see how it'd be depressing, but it's a job. We take care of all of your needs. Like, you can ask for basically anything within reason. And even when they describe the phone call he had with his wife, it sounds like his wife is doing okay. She got a new puppy. It's peeing everywhere. Like, it doesn't seem like they were talking about how horrible it is for her, how much she misses him. So it's really all on his end. It's not like he didn't suggest that he feels bad for his wife that he's away or that he's being motivated by concern for her. It's like he is just homesick. Get over it.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel bad for him, but at the same time, like, you knew what you were signing up for, and it's taking longer than you expected, but that's on you. Right.
And he seemed so professional at the beginning. He showed a lot of promise, and I don't think he was putting on a false front, but I just think he wasn't made of the right stuff.
Yeah. Yep, agreed. Back in the security trailer, Mike notices some dead pixels on the camera and they start to suspect that there's a problem here. Mike and the security crew barge into the warehouse, turn all the lights on in the middle of the night, go into Werner's house and see he's gone and he has left a note. Kai and the gang are all confused. What's going on? One of the security guys goes up to the roof, and we basically piece together that Werner escaped in the middle of the night, went up to the roof, climbed down, and got away. What happens next? You and I speculated last time we talked that Mike is going to have to kill Werner. Do you still thinking that?
I think it's very likely. It would, in terms of character development, it would make a lot of sense because we've basically witnessed Mike growing more and more nihilistic, and he's becoming more of just a person for hire, like a mercenary, rather than someone driven by a strong moral sense. He's getting to the point where he's just, we know he's going to end up working for Gus a lot, and we know Gus isn't a very good guy, but Mike doesn't seem to care. He's just trying to make money to leave for Kaylee.
And we haven't seen him in Better Call Saul up to this point kill somebody that didn't deserve it, or kill somebody purely for the sake of, we can't have you talking. And we did see a little bit of that in Breaking Bad, right?
Yeah. So I think it would make sense in terms of his development to see him kill Werner, but I'm always hesitant to predict something that's predictable. So there's other things that could happen too. So it's possible, Werner was not in a good state at the time. I don't know if he was totally in his right mind. For all we know, he'd been drinking more or something like that too to cope with the pressure. It really could be anything. I don't think that's necessary for the explanation, but
there's also the question of how do they finish building without Werner?
Yeah, and so I have two responses. So first, I think he's not in his right mind, and so it's possible that when he realizes what he's done and when he knows what the consequences are, he just kills himself. That's one possibility. I don't know how likely that is, but it would kind of make sense if he truly understood that the threat hanging over his head was that Gus would kill him.
I just came up with a new prediction, but I'm going to let you, you had a second theory, right?
Less of a theory and more of just a response to the next thing you said, which was, without Werner, what do they do to finish the construction? I think, so Werner said that Kai knew enough to take over for him over the weekend that he was gone. It's possible Kai knows enough to do the whole rest of the project. It would make sense given that they made us like Kai this episode, so it'd be easier for us to stomach the idea of him taking over.
If Werner's gone, though, how willing would Kai and the others be to keep working?
True, that might not be so good for morale if they're like, hey, your buddy's dead.
I have one more question for you, and then I'll blow your mind with this theory I just came up with.
All right.
First, do you think, what's Gus's reaction here? Is he gonna give Mike a hard time?
I think he's going to be all business at first, at least. I don't think he's going to give Mike a hard time so much as just instructions about how to solve this.
All right, so let me.
But wait. Let me just say one thing.
Yeah.
Mike screwed up.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. He gave Werner way too much leeway. He did not take seriously enough Werner's psychological state, and he should have been making sure that Werner was monitored 24/7 after his blabbing.
On top of that, Mike signaled to Gus that there's nothing to worry about with Werner. And the thing, in my experience, the thing that pisses off managers or leaders more than anything is when you don't escalate an issue that you know about, and then it becomes a bigger issue. Ready for the theory? Mike is... Ready for the theory?
Yeah.
Mike is talking to Gus, and Gus will ask Mike a question because they're going to be wondering, how do we finish building this without Werner? What do we do? And then Gus will ask Mike, is there anything we can do to motivate him, Then they kidnap his wife, and they say, you're going to finish building this, or we're going to kill that puppy, John Wick style, and then kill your wife, Punisher style.
Gus loves comics.
Yeah. Mike, have I ever told you about my affinity for comic books? There was a character, Frank Castle, whose wife and children were killed tragically. Yes?
I will be that killer.
What do you think?
What I think is, I can't gauge how likely that is to happen, but it's an awesome theory. And if it does happen, you heard it here first. I think it fits Gus's personality perfectly because he exploits what's important to people as a way to manipulate them. I remember vividly when he was threatening Walter over something, and he's like, I will kill your infant daughter.
That's right.
Among other people that he was going to kill.
I will kill your full-grown wife.
I will kill your teenage son. Yeah, so I would totally buy it if that's what happened. I think that would be a really... The only doubts I have about it are the fact that there's that she's in Germany, and so it would make things more complicated. But that would be an awesome way to tie in some Madrigal plot development. If that's what happens, he would maybe need to call up some resources back in Germany through Madrigal, which would be a great way for us to get more exposure to what's going on there.
That's true. And
great theory.
One more question, I think, before we wrap up. Gale, are we going to see him next episode? One more glimpse this season?
I feel like we won't see him until the lab is prepared. But I would like to see him, and I just don't know why we would. Unless they do another time jump.
Yeah, I tried to think about, would Gale be able to help with finishing build out of the lab, but I think he could help with the setup once it's all built, but I don't think they're ready for him yet.
Yeah. I'm very excited for the lab to get finished, because once the lab is done and Gale is in there, Gus no longer needs any support. He can be a fully independent operation. And that's when things are really going to change for him. And it's interesting because the whole dynamic right now between him and the cartel is dependent. It basically relates to how he and the Salamancas both take orders from Don Eladio. And no one knows that he's doing this. And it's not just important that the law doesn't find out, but it's arguably even more important that the cartel has no idea what he's doing.
Yeah.
Like, think about how much trust he put in Mike for this.
Yeah, which is, you're just underlining how important it is that Werner does not leak this information. So, yeah. I mean, one way or another, they're going to go after him next episode. The only question for me is, do they catch him? If they do, are they going to try and strong harm him into finishing building it and then kill him? Or are they just going to outright kill him? I have a feeling it's the former. But like you said, every time we try and predict what's going to happen next, we're, I don't know, usually I won't say we're totally wrong. Sometimes there's elements of being right. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm Gil.
I'm Adam.
And this is Saulcast. As our world hangs in the balance, two heroes have been charged with one simple mission: recap and review comic books. On today's episode, we're talking about Amazing Spider-Man Issue 1. Only problem is, one of them has never read a comic book in his life. You've never read one of the comics?
No.
Wow, okay.
I've seen a physical book before, but I just looked at the cover.
But don't worry, Gil has done the research, and he'll help them along the way. Oh yeah, by the way, Peter Parker. He's Spider-Man.
Okay.
The drama, because we need those stories to get through the day. through the hard times. This is my story, the one I play in my head while everything goes wrong. The action! He sees him in lizard form, he starts freaking out. He starts telling everybody, don't panic!
Spider-Man, I will stop you with my black goo.
I'm not sure what that was, but hey, there's movie news too. Venom. Coming to a theater near you this Friday. Are you gonna see it?
Eventually.
Gil Reads Comics. Available in the Apple Podcasts app or any other podcast app today. Just search Gil Reads Comics. That's Gil Reads Comics. See the show notes for a link.